protection from the area of economic empowerment of with ONU UN women. And as I said, knowing about this progress made in national and even subnational legislation in Latin America that guarantee the right to care is what we will explore today. The coordinators of this community discussed with Patricia what we did in the last meeting we had, this collective reflection meeting we had last month, sorry, and because of the, and we also shared with her some of the dilemmas we discussed, the definition of care itself, which we have several times agreed that it's a polysemic term. And this causes problems when legislation is being formulated. So today we're going to see what legislations define care as work and which ones define care as a right. So we have been discussing what is more important. If we need to develop an umbrella concept and from there develop other definitions, as Valerie Esquivel said, if we define care as work, and we have also explored the issue of co-responsibility that many public policies consider the different actors, the providers and guarantors of care. We have seen that considering care as a right, what the obligations of the state should be, and if these obligations are being complied with or not. Last session, we also discussed the universality, the issue of universality. And if care is a right, is universality not only named but guaranteed? And lastly, according to Patricia, who is a great expert, what lessons, what takeaways are there from the processes, from ongoing processes, and how can we continue to strengthen the guarantee of the right to care? So this is our main input. Today, our main input will be Patricia's presentation. She can use 30 to 40 minutes, whatever she prefers. And then we're going to have Mora, Alejandra Mora, who will be sharing with us the content of the model law on care, which is another piece of this puzzle on care. So without further ado, I give you the floor. Patricia, thank you very much for your time and for being with us today. Thank you, Elisa. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. I've been participating in different meetings organized by the Alliance. I haven't been able to attend all of them in live, I mean, in person, but I've read the summaries and minutes. So there are many questions that have emerged from these sessions. I can't commit to answer to all of the questions that have emerged, but I can collaborate by giving you a perspective of what's been happening in Latin America from a regulatory perspective. I'm going to share my presentation. I hope you can see it. Okay, I'll get started. Let me start my timer. Well, first of all, I'd like to share with you that this presentation is based on a consultancy performed at the end of 2020 with UN Women for Women. Mexico was developing a comprehensive law on care. And back then we were examining the legislative experiences in the region. And and I provided some recommendations. Today, I won't be talking about the recommendations, but what happened in the case of Mexico. Then, with the regional office of UN Women, there was a job created for creating policies for Latin America. And we also worked with the CLAC, and I'm going to use some basic definitions based on also all the definitions of the right to care. And we're going to think of a care system and its implementation in the territory. So some key elements. Let me tell you that we always try to visualize care as a fourth pillar, and seeing care from that perspective also makes us see the legislation from that perspective. So also,
Te pido un favor nada más, si puedes ir un poco más
can you
despacio
please
y vamos
go
a
a bit
buscar
more
lo
slowly, because
que nos
the
comentaste.
interpreters need you to go a bit more slowly. Another element that we worked on this document that has to do with the fact that many countries in the region have also been addressing is to incorporate care in the challenge of overcoming poverty and inequality. Obviously, something I don't need to explain to you is how the need for care have become a critical knot, a structural knot for inequality, and women are the ones who pay the higher cost, and also as an engine for the socioeconomic recovery. We all had a world pandemic that reinforced gender inequalities, and these inequalities, you know, unpaid care, unpaid work became an elemental, an essential factor. In previous sessions, we have discussed what the international instruments in the matter are, but basically I wanted to suggest to use care as one more pillar of, together with education, health, social security, and that care should be incorporated as another pillar of welfare. This document, the analysis I carried out of, regulations, was the care system is a series of policies aimed at having a new social care organization in order to provide care, assist, help and support people who require it, as well as to recognize, reduce, and redistribute care work, which is mainly carried out by women. I think the word care itself has to be reformulated without thinking of it as something that has to be imposed, uh, and care cannot be imposed on those who are in situation of dependency. So also, when it's important to recognize, reduce, and redistribute care work. This is, Laura has mentioned this several times, the different rights of the target populations, and see how the interaction of the different rights has to be recognized, especially when public policies are being formulated. This has been translated into two essential questions. First, the components of the care system. The point is not to create separate programs, because this goes against the rights of the different target populations. And it's important to keep in mind who the caregivers are, and also who the care recipients are. And we have to encompass all these components, and regulation of services as an essential point. It is important to create services that reduce the burden, the care burden of families, and not only or rule out the cash transfers, because cash transfers reinforce roles, and it's important to see how what the rules of the game are. And on the we also have the regulation of the services and the labor conditions of those who provide paid work, and the training of caregivers in the we need to in the understanding that women don't have a natural chip to provide care. And also we have the management of information and knowledge. Colombia is spearheading this, and there's a lot of information that can uphold quality decisions regarding the implementation of public policies. And least, last but not least, communication to promote cultural change. We need to create care systems, but we need to remember there's gender co-responsibility and also the co-responsibility of different actors. It is important to remember this to create a cultural change. So as I was saying, care systems have this a programmatic aspect, and also what we call the dynamic of the implementation. We need to identify how the states move toward the implementation of public policies. So it's very important to have intersectoral coordination, and there are different models that have led to the intersectoral governance. But of course, each ministry needs and secretary, according to their respective competencies, need to start working on this regard. And this implies a shift of logic and start thinking of the persons. So to have systems centered on the persons, to have this intersectoral management. The objective of this intersectoral management is implementation of of these components that lead us to the third element, social participation. If we truly want to have a management that incorporates social, political, and institutional actors and the participation of the community, we need social participation. So political governance, the programmatic management, and social participation become key. Target populations. Here we have a great debate, and we need to start to rethink. And I guess we've been talking about this throughout the different sessions. The right to care is the right to provide care, the right to self-care, and the right to receive care. And I think all of us throughout the course of our lives have found ourselves in this situation. And I think women have have not always prioritized self-care. What is true is that over time, what has been prioritized at the level of public policy is children, persons in a situation of dependency, temporary or permanent, and care workers. And here we see the aspect of paid and unpaid care work. I think this definition is pretty broad, and then we will be analyzing case by case. And so I would like us to change a bit more in the case of temporary dependency to see what public policy is prioritized. But undoubtedly, we need to start thinking on instruments and action plans. Action plans have become the the pathway that each country has been following. I think the difference between The regulatory aspect and the action plans is the way each when prioritizes the target populations. I'm not going to talk about the principles that guide the creation of the care systems that, you know, universality, solidarity, care as a right. I will talk about these points when we analyze specific examples, and also the promotion of autonomy as a key element. If we prioritize the element of the promotion of autonomy, the different collectives will feel that they will have to be included in the policy, and this will give more solidity to the process. So with now, let me tell you how I started classifying my work, and that's and that's why I gave you this brief introduction. Well, first of all, back then, I I analyzed the gender equality repository of ECLAC, and 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 obviously afterward, and as I said, it was like a snap, like a picture. We have made great progress in the last 2 years, and then I started analyzing comprehensive care models. For I created 4 categories. I reviewed constitutional models, basically national projects, national bills, and also subnational cases because some of them were very interesting. And then I started thinking of comprehensive care models from a sectorial perspective because we had a matrix of social protection, health, and care. And so we pictured care as a comprehensive sectoral law would imply to analyze the case of Uruguay, for example. And then I also reviewed comprehensive models by target population. We I performed this analysis at the level of countries. For instance, the protection of the early childhood or aging adults, or comprehensive laws. We need to incorporate care, comprehensive law models, and laws. You know, currently only make we have refer to health and education, but not so often to care. So I thought this was interesting. And lastly, some laws that refer to some specific components. Uh, this idea of the components that refers to services, the management of information and knowledge and communication. Some laws refer to specific services. So based on this big classification, what I did was I started analyzing based on the categories that are below, country by country. Used very few laws from Europe, and then beyond the first questions that have to do with the target population and the components of the law, I was able to systematize all the laws that dealt with the issue. And then I also analyzed the framework of the law, the framework of a specific service, always thinking that one thing is a care program and quite another is a care law, and also references to financing, which, you know, we have few references to financing, but yes, governments need to have the ability to make political decisions. Otherwise, it would be impossible to rule. And I have to say that it is possible to develop mechanisms to generate financing, funding, or sources of funding. And then I analyzed the components of the human rights perspective. Remember the beautiful talk Laura Patasi gave us about the human rights perspective and its elements, and I use that her concepts too. So at the constitutional level, there was very little regarding knowledge of care. For example, Ecuador promotes co-responsibility as something as a novelty. And the last case I analyzed was the political constitution of Mexico City that guarantees the right to care and the right to free time. I've reviewed the things that have been approved. Now, the things that are still in the pipeline, you know, the rest of the preferences are older, much older, and there's much burden with regard to time policies that have to do with leaves from a very paternalistic point of view, because the time policies, you know, unfortunately, that's the situation we live with regard to the different constitutions. Now, in purple, you can see the laws that have been approved. Uh, Uruguay approved the law number 19.353 in 2015, and Costa Rica in 2014 approved the creation of the National Network on Care and Child Development. Another one, we have it also approved the law number 10.192 that created the National Care System, Care and Support System. And this is for the early childhood and for people who are in situation of dependency. It has a national network on care. So the ones that are in the pipeline, you know, Mexico has a constitutional reform that has been passed by the House of Representatives, but is being reviewed by the Senate. And this also will hopefully result in the creation of a national care system, in the sense that the implementation, so if, but also there was the presentation of a bill on a general bill for the a care system that the Senate hasn't approved. Also, in Paraguay, there's a bill that creates the national care system, and it happened in mid-December last year, and it was submitted by one of the commissions. And these two projects, both the Paraguayan and the Mexican project, are very similar to the Uruguay project, in the sense that they collect the idea of providing care, the idea to self-care, the providing care, to receive care, and to self-care in conditions of equality with quality, the same way the Uruguayan model does. Also, we have another project that hasn't made much progress in Ecuador. It has been incorporating another projects to the matrix of social protection, and it focuses, it is a project of an organic law that creates the national comprehensive care system. And also in Argentina, there's another project that has a big component for that is based on cash transfers and leaves. In that regard, this bill has different characteristics. With regard to comprehensive regulatory regulations by target population, we sorry, these are laws that have already been approved. We have 35 comprehensive laws that somewhat touched upon care. And I think that something important here is that most of these laws create spaces of coordination and greater participation for social actors. And I believe this element I had today of incorporating care into as a new pillar, I think it's possible because these regulations make it possible to incorporate care. Indeed, most of these spaces are do not incorporate political decision, but I believe it is important to consider this because they promote the possibility of advancing care for the different target populations. And I think this is a strength that can that will allow us to move forward, and it's interesting. Also wanted to say that in the case of the laws and that and the different and its and their relationship with the different components, we have many more laws, and these have to do with regulation. Time policies, policies regarding leaves. Some of them are very paternalistic, but we also have some indications of the presence of other components that can be our lower limits for new systems. Here, for instance, Colombia is spearheading the process because they have surveys to measure time use. And then we have the system of national accounts. They have a very interesting project in that regard. And with regard to services, the Uruguayan model, I will show you this, took the initiative of separating these two questions. And there are laws that refer to services. In the case of Mexico, for example, the bill had to do with care services for children. Now we have other regulations in my category, so to speak. With regard to domestic work, there is a debate that needs to go deeper to see when can we include domestic workers as caregivers. And the other thing, another thing that has been debated is the issue of social security. Uruguay recognizes that domestic work and unpaid care work as and it considers the time women have provided this kind of work to grant them retirement. So this has to do with reinforcing the role and the possibility of redistributing the burden of care that has mainly fallen on women's shoulders. And I thought it was important to put this on the table to think it moving forward, because I believe this has to be incorporated into care systems. Now, in the few minutes I have left, I would like to analyze the Uruguayan model. This law created the national care system in Uruguay in 2015. The elements of this law are briefly related to some of the projects that took this model as a basis. The first thing that was done was to establish conceptual definitions. So we have thoroughly discussed what the definition of care, autonomy, care system, and dependency. And, and I would also like to incorporate other definitions, but by now this is what the process included. And then it included principles and guidelines for the system. And here there are some of the things we have already addressed. Some are key, for instance, how to work on progressiveness, universality, from the perspective of rights, as Laura told us, we always need to think of progressiveness and non-regressiveness. And there are elements that all these principles and guidelines that are reflected in the law materialized in practical things. For instance, we have equity, gender equity, and generational equity. Another thing that is important is financing. The Uruguayan model does not establish minimum amounts for investment in care, but it establishes that the care system has the power to allocate resources. And this is an important thing because the we can maybe we can replicate this model in other countries in the region, and we can incorporate the budgetary guidelines, because what it did, it created a baseline from where we can move on. And then we have the rights and obligations of the holders, subjects of the policy. So we have the elderly and persons with disability and in situation of dependency, children aged 0 to 12, and the caregivers. You know, this is one of the main things of Uruguay. They incorporate adolescents, and I personally am going through this stage. I have to deal with adolescents, and this implies a lot of care work. And so I think it is very important to incorporate not only small children but adolescents. Obviously, caregivers in the case of Uruguay, they talk about paid and unpaid caregivers, and they talk about the objectives of the system and its institutions. It creates a space for interinstitutional coordination that results in the governance of the system that is led by the Ministry of Social Development. So, and the Women's Institute was part of the advisory committee, but since the this system depends on the Ministry of Social Development, you know, no more was done in this regard. There's also, let me show you uh, that we're going to talk about budgetary guidelines and reporting, how this is making progress in the Uruguayan society, and this has been done in the first part of the system.
These are the institutions of the system, the board that I just mentioned, which is the political body, the advisory committee that deals with social actors, and the secretary of social care. And as I was saying, that the secretary, the national secretary on care, changes, and this is a problem because they're confounding, they're confusing things. We're talking about particular populations and how care is one more dimension, and we cannot, that only persons with disabilities are the only ones requiring care. We need to incorporate several of the things, And care is not only the referred to again to persons with disabilities, but at the institutional level, there are problems in the case of Uruguay. These are the ministries and state organisms that integrate the National Care Board. We have the Ministry of Social Development, and we have the National Institute for Women, are part of this representation for women, and then all these ministries beyond the different ministries and bodies that every country may have, these areas are part of the bills on care that have been submitted so far. Here we have the the advisory committee on care, and this is something that important because they talk about the how to put a dimension to the actors, social actors that are involved in care. I'm talking about the or civil society organizations, but it's important to incorporate uh, uh, care workers, the creation in Uruguay of the system of care produce new unions, and that is a very interesting issue to work on. It's important to have all this in present. The academy, of course, that what was included in the Uruguayan model, the national university, which had the bigger representation, and also the private centers for research. And finally, the caregiving sector. The market will play a role in this system. The system is not only about public services. We talk about a national system that integrates market, community, corporations, uh, cooperatives. In this case, UI included all this, included the services for accompaniers. That it is a service that provide some companies as well, and they changed. They modified this according the provisional services based on this. We also have cooperatives of in in the, that were all these bodies were incorporated to the advisory committee. These are just key tools that we have to the creation of successive plans for care. The first national care from 2016 and the second plan from 2021 to 2025. We had a slump there because of the pandemic and some delays in the presentation of the plans, but this is a very important tool, and the advisory committee, the society organizations played a great role claiming that the plan existed, that the plan should be put into practice, because in the plans is where we're going to see really if the program is really going towards universality or not. And one of the difficulties of that the civil society has been claiming in the case of the second plan in Uruguay is that it's not very clear. Goals and budgets are not very clear, so it's very difficult to exercise control. But this is the tool that we have, and we said that all regulatory frameworks should incorporate how to monitor advances of care policies. I, I think it's important to say that the law was passed in 2015, but work didn't finish there. It just started, in the sense that we had to create many regulatory decrees that would accompany the assembly of all of the care policies. And well, the first one, there are several, but the first one is very important because it may give some sense to the cattle of services, the obligations and rights of the users, and the instruments to measure dependency that in the case of Uruguay was done in the previous period. And we adapted the model from Spain, and in some the model of Spain. Then we have the advisory committee, and then there were revitalized some regulatory aspects regarding some existing services or services that needed to be changed. Because in the, an example of a service that did not exist is the telehealth assistance. So we need to regulate the functioning of this new component, these new services. There were other services that were adapted, like the regulatory of the services for the elderly. Uh, Also, there were regulations regarding training. Who's going to train? Who's going to receive training? What would be the work trajectory that it will have, and what happened? What changed in Uruguay through this law was uh, was what leaves that in case of Uruguay, that finally we got 30, 13 weeks for uh, father for leaves for fathers and 3 weeks for mothers. But in 2016, this reached a climax, so that this national care system would facilitate resources to comply with these provisions. It's important to remember all these questions, to carry on to going in depth and studying to promote comprehensive care systems because of, well, maybe because of our development in our countries, because of gender equality, gender gender equality rights. So I will just wait for you. Thank you. That will be all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patricia. Yeah, I have several questions, but we're going to leave them to the end of this blog. So please, who, if you have questions for Patricia, please save them for them. I've just seen Secretary Alejandra Mora. Welcome, Secretary. Thank you very much for being with us. The Secretary Mora is the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission on Women of the Organization of American States, and she's going to talk about the Inter-American Model Law on Care. And the idea is after this description that Patricia gave us of what we're calling progress in legislations and regulations in Latin America, and it's good to take a look at this law because it's one more piece in the puzzle that adds to this progress. To the Secretary Mora and your team, very efficient. We asked her to give us a presentation and that could respond to some questions that have emerged. Of course, knowing that the process of developing this law, collecting these notes, they were talking, they were sharing with us the definition of care in the model law, but it would be great to take a look at how you came up with it. And what we want to know is to what extent the vision of care was incorporated into the law, and to know in this process, I don't know how to call it, of dissemination of complementary in process in countries where this is happening in the design of policy cares, and how compatible is it with this model? Well, I'm going to give you give the floor to Anna. I'm I'm the chat the presentation in English is on the Zoom platform. If for those native English native speakers, so that you can take a look at the presentation and follow the secretary. Thank you very much and welcome, Secretary. Thank you very much, Elisa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for providing this space. I want to say hello to Patricia. I just listened to the last part of your presentation to to know exactly what you were talking about. My colleague Patrice and all the women that are in this space. It's very important. We created a law. This is how the different competencies interact with with the organizations that are trying to push the topic of care, and the Inter-American Commission of Women that was founded 95 years ago. Uh, this was an analytical community that demanded a space in the organization, Inter-American Organization, and then that happened to the OAS. And I'm saying this because we started doing legal analysis and what they were doing was that they indicate what was the situation of women was in the region regarding rights, and based on that they would create proposals. And this has been the institutional strength that has resulted in a model in something called the Inter-American Model Laws. And here we had this is a good opportunity to create an Inter-American Model Law on care. It's incredible that that all this time had to happen for care to be on the map, because this has happened because care has happened for millennia, and right now it's been placed at a different on a different kind of importance. We had made a great effort to carry out an analysis of how much of the legal world, conventional, international, uh, touch on women, if the conventions are enough or not, because we still believe that the engine of change of at the national level comes from the international level, and within that logic, the result is that it's not enough. And I have to tell you here that one of the purposes of the CIM is to achieve a convention on women's empowerment, economic empowerment, and that exists and that regulation exists that allows us to make progress. This is a dream, as always, but that's the way we exist, because we try to we dream and we try to drive this kind of topics. It's obviously that the last convention that we carried out within in Belén de Pará changed the world in terms of violence topics, and we could think together to take a look at what should be done at the international level. And that's why we have been working on care as a structural topic of economic empowerment of women, plus five other lines that we have been working. We have been working on the digital line to create legal instruments, and I'm telling you all this to see how how this work is organized in care. The other thing that I think it's important, we think it's important, is to say that much of what we've seen were included in legal instruments of public policies and others in legal instruments. Legal instruments have the advantage that have permanence throughout time and goes beyond the administrations of countries. And that's very important, because it's so important that these instruments, as Patricia was saying, and all the systemization of these instruments and how this derives in plans, and that takes us to the complete development of the topic. But the structural, that everything we want to have to make that, that get to an instrument, international instrument that can comply, that can compile all these topics, good practices. Using what a model law does is to research, compile experiences, and then there's a process of consultation to listen to experts and their recommendations, and then there's the first draft, which is the general skeleton. There's a process of review, and that's the way this is how it works. How do we configure a model law? We to this with this model law, once we launched the model law, we created another instrument that is parallel to this one, which is the implementation guideline. Why? Because the model law from the from the from the from the from the internal perspectives of the OAS plays with the utopia, with a vision that goes beyond everything, but we need to maintain a balance of where the states are and how far they can get. Because for the model law to function, it has to have countries have to need to know that they can get there. That is not 200 years before they get to comply with this law. So this is a complex analysis between what exists and what is possible and the utopia. So what we did was to put a series of elements that could not be in the model law were included in the implementation guideline. There are a compilation of experiences and readings of ideological type that may be a reference for countries that haven't really advanced that much, and the model law stays in between all this. Now, and I'm saying this because many countries have the objective of the model law, and they could use this guideline. Implementation guideline will help them to get there, and it's like the sister that provides comprehensiveness to the process. Both the law and the guideline has been launched, so we're there. The law makes use of concepts that in this space we have discussed a lot. The topic of the restructuration, redistribution, and reward of care. Of course, we talk about the right to care, which is a great transformation, and that is, we believe, is the most important. Of course, all this has to do with many more elements, make it very visible, evaluate, uh, account for it, and distribute it. And here, what we're saying is how we what happened in other countries. And of course, Costa Rica, Uruguay have been a reference for this. We need to. One of the great topics for Uruguay that they privatize, and Patricia said it, uh, and the organizations adjusted to this privatization. But at the end, when all these caregivers were the responsibilities for payment, and then the rights of these caregivers depended on who used the service, at the end we had a problem with the rights of the people who for the caregivers. That's why the rights of caregivers are essential. And look, one of these days we were talking about of a woman that were theorizing about this topic. She said that she was saying to the right not to care. This is important. This is something that many of us who we have elderly people, and we have in a world of multiality world, we are we are dealing with it with care that somehow is connected to us. But in the middle of all this, the rights of care, the caregivers' rights, and the right not to care, and create and reach co-responsibility through all this. Well, what we would like to do, and these are the elements of the model law, is recognition, reduction, and redistribution. We have all the co-responsibility of care, which are all the new actors and how they are organized, remuneration, that is regarding the value work, care work, and and remuneration is through social protection systems and representation, that how needs are being accounted for, who are of those who are carrying out care work, and how they are listened to. And we believe this is fundamental. I would like to just point out that the paradigms in the legal instruments are very important. And and since we are trying to build new paradigms, and here one of the most important paradigms is trying to advocate for transforming the sexual division of work. Uh, and here we believe there's an essential topic point. That's why it's important that the first part of the law that resignifies the concept of work, together with what the ILO has done, that work is the transformation of goods and services, and all this is called work. We want to change this. That's why the conceptualization of this part in the first part of the law is very important. The other point is that it's a complex paradigm of the law, and it's a particularity of the law, because law is based on a very deep individuality, and that individuality somehow generates the world that we have, where the most important thing is me, and the rest is it just doesn't matter. And that's why it's so important talk about to talk about interdependency, because this concept of interdependency is fundamental for human beings. We are interdependent persons, people, and that perspective, you only acquire this perspective is when they help you to see it. This interdependence makes us look to look far or beyond individual rights to the rights of everyone. And this is a change in paradigm that is essential. That is also a change that makes a lot of sense within the logic of putting the life sustenance as a paradigmatic topic where on which care is based. And of course, connected to this is governance and financial sustainability have a lot to do with this as well. Here we have a question that Elisa was talking about. Why a law on care? Because we're talking about it's impressive that how how COVID helped to do this, because when when the household became very important because everyone was at home. Uh, it's what is the only thing that COVID has helped us to do, especially women, and it has helped us to say, well, there are days that are more hopeful than others, but I believe that has helped us to place the discourse, but not the strategic actions yet. There are so many states that are going very slow with this process, and we need to push them because before it's too late, because this has to happen now. It should have happened yesterday, and then there has been very slow.
So what we're aiming at is a cultural transformation. And as the beginning, I was saying, why do we bet on on legal issues? Why? Because we need to cause deep changes. So this debate, the discussion of those who are for and against, it's a discussion that changes cultures. The legal discussion involves all the entire population, and that's why I think it's so important. Now, I'd like to talk about the social function of care, because care sustains life and society as a whole, and the natural setting environment where it is deployed. And all this is based on interdependence and the essential vulnerability of the human condition. And I think that's why it is so important to use concepts, because legal, but legal instruments cannot include all concepts. And so we could not include all the concepts, but we we try to incorporate most of those that our region has developed with regard to care, so that all of us know what we're talking about, and how powerful to produce change it is. These are the critical notes. The law includes the right to people to be cared for, and the fact that it's a pillar in the system of social protection, because more than 20 countries talk about a welfare state, and a welfare state has to guarantee a new pillar. And most of existing legal instruments establish that the welfare state consists of pensions and other elements. Therefore, we need to reinforce this idea. The issue of co-responsibility, the how the also the idea that care is an economic issue. How can we place it as an economic issue? So because it is an economic issue, we need to talk about economic recovery, and I think it's a key instrument for for economic recovery. And and there has been segmentation in the countries, because on the one hand we have protection for the elderly, on the other hand we have protection for children, and there's no logic that tells us that all of us are in need of care, and there's a need for multirality, multisectoriality. Here we have the definition of care that was produced by the law. We will understand care as a wide array of everyday activities that are aimed at managing and sustaining life, that are carried out within or outside the household, and allow for the physical, biological, and emotional well-being of the persons, and particularly those who lack the autonomy to perform them by themselves. So, this was very important. The domestic workers, or, we had a tremendous input from conversations regarding domestic work, but I think we can bring this back, because it has tremendous repercussion for the hundreds and thousands of women who work in this area, and has an impact on this dimension. Now, here we have the right to care, which is to guarantee the comprehensive development throughout the life cycle and provide care in conditions of equality, dignity, co-responsibility, and self-care. This is super important. I think this is a lesson that we learned from Uruguay, and we also have the right of unpaid caregivers. I think these are the dimensions that have been established in a tripartite perspective. Uh, you know, I had a conversation with a woman a while ago who really persisted in and insisted in us including the right to not care. And she said, you know, I'm sorry, I'm very worried about this issue. Well, let me come back to my presentation. The critical issues that contribute to guaranteeing the right to care, uh, you know, this gives us the legal justification to consider it as a right. It establishes care as the fourth pillar of the social protection system, enshrines, enshrined in universality and progress in the framework of progressiveness. Now, every time when we establish a right, this is something very important. For example, in Belém do Pará, for us who have worked for many years in the issue of violence, and when people told us that the most important thing was the relationship between people, Belém do Pará changed that established a shift of paradigm and said that when other rights are present, and you know, we need to remember there's an interdependence of rights, and what happens is that immediately the state has to be the guarantor. And I think that's one of the shifts of paradigms that we need to establish, that the state has been the historical guarantor. And so now in the it was important to, when we is create a right, establish a right in a law, immediately the state appears as a guarantor of that right with obligations and then there are criteria for compliance and effectiveness. Another thing that was important was not only the possibility to understand what happens when you represent only one population, not all the populations. We can, we, so what we saw was that tensions were used to be dealt with bilaterally, and there we had a different type of governance scheme, and what we saw that it worked, but up to a certain point. And so what we realized we needed was a comprehensive perspective. Now, this law proposes specific actions and responsibilities for the state, because the state has not only the responsibility to do something, but it has the other responsibility, the responsibility to protect the right to care. And here there's a logic of the state as a caregiver, and the state has to ensure that there are institutions that protect the adoption of these policies. So the state is a doer and a guarantor. And this also presupposes that the the private sector has to be brought to the table, and that the private sector also has responsibilities, and the private sector has to think and wonder, well, people who are workers, do they have their care needs resolved or not? And when we talk about workers, we need to think of men and women. And if our care needs haven't been resolved, then we need to stay at home. And that means that someone is not going to be part of the paid employment market. So we post COVID, we need to know who's staying at home and who's going out to work. So the private sector has to wonder and ask these questions: who's going out to work, and who, if their care needs are being resolved or not. And I think this is an essential point. Another issue is what is the economic value and how to measure the possibility and the influence of what we're doing on these value chains. I think the construction of the economic value, for instance, the value added tax, where is the value that was assigned, and some values are invisible, and that invisible value has always been the women's contribution. And I think this is something fundamental, we can't forget. Okay, next steps. Of course, so many of the things that we are doing, when how can we talk to the states? How can we have a conversation with the states? We need to perform a kind of activities that go beyond what the ministries for women do. We produced a document that talks about care as an investment, not as an expenditure. So to highlight the importance of this issue, we need to talk about governance so that they can understand the dimension of what we're talking about. I think this is so powerful. It's, from the perspective of feminism, because this has created a new setting. And another important thing, in our opinion, is local governments. Local governments are the ones who are strategically closer to community needs, and everything is connected to the rest. And this has to do with having cross-cutting policies, and it's connected with local governments, subnational governments, and we we need to take into consideration what's happening at the level of local governance so that we can build better this very complex issue. This was a very general overview, a very quick look. Beatrice will give you will share with you this presentation and the implementation guide. You will find all the foundations that cannot be explained in terms of legal instruments. Legal instruments oftentimes, you know, a word is carries a lot of weight. So, when you're developing a legal instrument, you have to be very careful with the word language you use. For instance, the state will do, or the state will have the obligation to do all this or that. So when you are drafting a legal instrument, you need to be very careful with the words you use. So okay, I'll be ready to answer the questions you may have and strengthen, as I have said, you know, with with the law, what we've been trying to do is modernizing the law, quote unquote. And this is very difficult because when you draft a law is anchored and it's very difficult to change it. So, but with an implementation guide, we can resignify many of the concepts because every time we create a legal instrument, there are 1,000 forms that are better and more efficient to implement the law. We cannot change the law itself, but what we can do is we can resignify its content. And with that, uh, and for that, we use the implementation instrument. I hope I was clear enough what I was trying
Sí, muchas
to
gracias.
share with you.
De esta
Thank you,
excelente,
Secretary.
estamos compartiendo los
Uh,
materiales de la comunidad.
that
Ya
in
tenemos
on our drive where
ahí
we're sharing the materials of the community, we have the law
y
in
ahora
English and in
también vamos a
Spanish.
poner la guía para
And
otras
now we're
personas.
going to
Bueno, pues es momento de
upload the
preguntas, de
implementation guide.
respuestas.
Now,
Estamos
if you agree,
conectándonos.
we're going to
Carlos
open
Facundo
a
Chávez de
questions and
Oficinas de
answers
Comisionado
session, and Facundo Sanchez
de
from the
Noticias
High
al equipo
Commissioner's
de las
office is
justicias para
asking
compartir cómo
Patricia
pueden
and the
involucrar
same
a las
team
personas con
to share
discapacidad en
how
estos procesos.
they
Y
involved
aprovecho ahí, añado
persons with
una
disabilities in these
señal de que
processes.
en una de las sesiones
And
justamente
I would like to
trae
include
estas
another one. And a
recomendaciones
colleague of the
de
High
nuestros
Commissioner's
expertos.
office
A
also
veces
told
parecía
us
ser que
that
estábamos en debates
oftentimes
paralelos, quienes estábamos
there
conectados
seemed to be parallel
y por
debates
ello quienes
when we were
están en el
discussing
tema de los
care,
derechos para las
because
personas con
there was a
discapacidad.
debate on care
Y
and
en
a
esta
debate
pregunta concreta,
on
Patricia,
the rights of
en la
persons with
definición
disabilities.
que
And
en
here,
México ya se
Patricia,
adoptó,
the
tanto de
definition
Uruguay
that was
como del
adopted in
sistema,
Uruguay with
que
regard to
incluye
care
como
and the
verbos
care system,
asistir y apoyar,
you said
entiendo que
there
estos
was
verbos en el
the
mundo
verbs that
de
were
la
used
discapacidad
were
se utilizan
to help
en
and
nombre de cuidados.
support.
Entonces,
And I understand
simplemente
these
sería
words are
agregar
used
estos
in the world of
adjetivos nuevos
disabilities. I don't know if by
asociados a
adding
persona
these
y
two
creo que
verbs
se
you have
complementa con el
solved the
tema de
problem.
Facundo, ¿no?
And I
Para
think
todos
this
ellos
is to
involucrar a
add
las
to
personas
Facundo's
con
question.
discapacidad,
How did you involve
las poblaciones
persons with disabilities?
vulnerables
Because this is a
mayormente, ¿no?
priority
Entonces,
population
aquí voy a una segunda
that
pregunta para
needs care.
ambas
And then
expositoras.
another question for
Justamente
both
discutimos aquí
speakers
dependencia
is
versus autonomía. Patricia, tú
dependency
mencionaste el
versus
proceso de
autonomy.
promoción de la
Patricia, you
autonomía
said you
como uno de
promote
los componentes.
the idea of
Entiendo la
the
importancia,
promotion of
pero
autonomy
cuando
is
uno
a
ve cómo
component,
está
and I
regulada
understand the
la norma
importance. But when we see how
en la ley modelo,
the
vemos que se entiende
regulations were
dependencia.
drafted in the model
Aquí
law, there's
una parte de
it
la
says a
dependencia
relationship of
ciudadana, ¿cómo
dependency.
buscas, cómo se hace
In
decisivo
Mexican society, we
esta
don't like the
reflejada
language,
en la ley
the
del sistema que debe
in
ser cesado? Porque
the
se
law
dice,
proposed
parece que
by the
solo queremos
Senate
gestionar la
hasn't
dependencia.
been
Y yo entiendo que no,
very well accepted because
cómo hacer más
people say that it
énfasis en la parte
promotes
de autonomía
dependency. So how
y no
can we
en la parte
emphasize
de la
more
dependencia
the
que
part of the autonomy
establece
and not so much the part
simplemente procesos.
of the
Gestionamos la
dependency?
dependencia y
How can we say that we are managing
entonces todas
dependency
las personas,
and we're not
incluidas las personas
and
con
what
discapacidad,
and we are
logren autonomía?
l-
Y
looking
quiero
for
hablar de eso
ways to
porque
achieve
justamente
autonomy
es
for all,
que
including
queremos
persons with
resolver, esta
disabilities.
comunidad
And I
entiende que
think
resolver, pero
I don't
hemos
think this
identificado
community
situaciones
will resolve this
vulnerables
issue, but this
tanto
issue of
de
identifying
hacer
priority
cualquier
populations,
camino, de alcanzar el
to what
universalismo,
extent it
donde
is
no
an
solo partir de
obstacle
una situación
to achieving
específica donde se
universality.
pueda garantizar el
So
derecho al cuidado, ¿no?
how can
Y yo
we
creo que
guarantee
puede
the right to
corresponder
care
también
even in situations
vulnerabilities
of
que serán
dependency?
sujetas de derecho de
That
acuerdo a
I
su
think the
situación
law
de
says
dependencia.
that the
Eh,
persons will be
También me llamó la atención
holders
la
of
ley
the
modelo
right
se llama
according to their
en la
situation of
definición de
dependency.
cuidados,
And the definition of care
inmediatamente lo definen como trabajo de cuidados.
is
Y hemos tenido
you
esta
define
discusión de que
care
el trabajo
as
de cuidados es una
care work,
protección del
and
derecho al
we
cuidado.
have
Entonces es
being careful in this community to say that care work is a dimension of care, of caregiving. So in the next sessions, we're going to analyze the cases of Europe and Asia. So Secretary, could you tell me that for SIM, the other regions, Africa and Asia, have there been conversations about the law to have, I don't know if it's pertinent to have a model law in Africa and Asia? Have you had conversations with your peers? And if it has been the case, can you tell us a little bit more about these conversations? I don't know if there are other questions.
Yes, Laura, please. Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to both of you for your excellent presentations. I'm in line with Patricia. We have worked together for years, so we were much in agreement. It's a long time since I met with Alejandra and work also in this preoccupation that Elisa was talking about dependency and how the the comprehensive law on care has framed and because of the confidence we have with each other in each other. I would like to talk about the first version of the right to care, which applying the human rights approach, and that was something I talked about in the convention in 2007. What happens is that it takes up international instruments, and but also they didn't talk about a dependency as something that the human rights should cover, and it's what happens in this region. What they did, it's passively reflected in the comprehensive law, and that's something that in the guideline we should work better. I'm sorry that I haven't read the guideline completely, but what I think that we need to take out is only the need of the right, in the sense that the protection was focused on the person and broke away with what you were saying regarding the years of, 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 of care. So it was important to just put it as a human right. It's important to discuss this concept. And I understand that dependency concept of dependency is an Ibero-American problem, because this is what happened with because of the Spanish laws had this problem. So in our region, we could overcome this problem in the region. And to talking about Patricia's presentation and the right not to care, from my point of view, the right not to care is a very important argument, but it's an argument that has to come once we achieve that the persons who have not care start to care, to provide care. That there is social responsibility that, according to the Uruguayan experience here, in the case of Costa Rica, it is the weakest component in terms of culturality, etc. So the right not to care for women, because for women throughout 2000 years, we have the possibility of defining, but first of all, we need to talk about the value of the systems and how systems can operate so that this redistribution can be originated. So here the four components of care could operate to, in terms of the family component to achieve this redistribution, whether we provide care or not provide care. As a feminist, I totally agree with this. Now, strategically talking about in terms of what we can do in the region, I think there's a lot to do regarding the redistribution of care that Alejandra said. With the pandemic, this was very obvious. And the last element that we need to emphasize the Inter-American Commission of the rights of the elderly. But because it's a very important element in this moment to start with this regulatory framework, conventional regulatory framework, so that it is reflected on national instruments. So this is another instrument that we should highlight as a regional value, because this is the first convention that defines, that incorporates the right to care that that, that hadn't existed before. The rights approach helped us, but it was included, but it was not that clear.
Gracias, Laura. Maripili, por favor.
Thank you very much, Laura. Maripili. Thank you, Lisa. Two brief questions, two brief issues regarding the proposals of the two speakers. The element has to do that has with the conceptualization of work. I don't know if this is my perception, but I believe that in many of the countries in Latin America and in some countries, they have achieved this level of awareness as the care as care work, but there's still there are several disputes in recognizing the topic of care, and I think that this is the approach to incorporate it into these dynamics, and to look to have a perspective that is less rigid of paid work, not only regarding care work, but other types of work carried out in the informal sector that are not paid. They're not regarded as formal employment. And so we need to take a look at a strategic point of view, and see how what the impact that this would have, and how this logic would have an impact of on and make this perspective less rigid. And another topic that be we should be talk about, and we have several events where we have touched on care with different different populations, and self-care is still a problem, and it's still a problem because and because I never thought about it, and men put it on the table. So paternity cannot that cannot can say can enjoy the right not to care, and the right not to care does not doesn't mean that you don't have the responsibility, the same responsibilities. So there are a lot of things that need to be developed, and to clarify what what is responsibly assumed maternity and responsibly assumed paternity, and the right not to care. I think this is it's a problem in our countries like ours, who are very much machistas, and men have resisted assumed responsibility. So how do we deal with these issues that are eminently culturally and haven't been harmonized in all our countries?
Quisiera nada más comentar lo que nos están
Here
poniendo
we want to talk about some of the things in the chat
de quienes reciben
regarding
cuidados y sujetos
the
a
people who receive
discriminaciones
care,
arbitrarias
that not only look at it as target populations, but also
de derechos.
as rights holders. And I think that this is one of the great contributions of care as a right, that that despite the condition of dependency, all of us are rights holders, the ones that provide it as well as the ones who received it. Now, Patricia, so first round of answers, please. Thank you very much. Thank you for the interventions. I think there are many things we need to continue building together. I think that that the law on care in Uruguay didn't solve the problem of the population with disabilities, and I think that we talked about this after the law had been approved. We started to forming the topology of the services that were about to be provided, training as well, the incorporation of collectives with persons with disabilities. We have several difficulties here. Uruguay, in the first period, carried out a series of debates where the organization of people with disabilities participate. So we have several dimensions here. On the one hand, the diversity of persons with disabilities, which causes not which makes the problem less clear because of the different points of view. Now, the claim comes from of not think of in terms of dependency, but on the promotion of autonomy, and think of the obstacles to autonomy. And we can talk about from physical barriers, obstacles to all sorts of barriers that there are, and see what kind of help persons need. And that's why in the case of the law of Uruguay, this concept of the personal assistant that can carry out this physical activities that the person with disability cannot carry out. So in the first instance, what I wanted to make a distinction between these different autonomy levels, and then and at the beginning, what we wanted to say is that not everybody in situation of disability are in a situation of dependency and therefore require care. And if those barriers, technological barriers, physical barriers, I always think about the same example. A person with that's totally blind, 100% blind, has 100% disability. But if that person took training, in Uruguay there were some initiatives on how to carry out daily activities autonomously. That disability that was 100% does not generate a 100% dependency. The same thing happens with aging processes. People who age are not, when being 65 years old, do not require the same kind of care. And thinking that not all elderly people require that kind of support. And as Laura was saying, when talking about the European example of dependency law in Spain, and so that it wasn't, and that concept of dependency was incorporated in our laws. And when we started to build the system, and Uruguay it did that to try to interpret this system, and we started to find ourselves dealing with these situations, with these questions. The word care referred to in the imaginary to overprotecting care concept, where autonomy was not based on anything, and care had severe limitations. While I looked at the TV, I have an elderly person next to me, and I don't see them as a rights holder. So that what that caused, whether we started talking about or talking about autonomy, incorporating services, support, assistance, care, the basic training that we offered, so that talked about dependency, but not a course on care with or for people with disabilities. I think this is something that we're finishing in the region. I think that we have made progress, but that we need to achieve a balance, saying, well, in redistributing care, care, caregiving, of course, these populations are the ones that carry the heavier weight. But persons with disabilities that have lost, that don't have so enough autonomy to carry out day-to-day activities, and the elderly persons as well. Now, the way we name it has to correspond to the way we want to deal with it. Then there's an issue that we need to take into account that has to do with the that the right to care has to be universal. But it's also true that countries have to make progress in public policy, and the lack of autonomy create new collectives where we can start working on. It's clear that a person with severe disabilities require more care time, and the person that this person that this person requires, no matter what, someone to care for them. Because if not, if we don't, if it's in between life and death, there is the clear need to provide care, and that provide care has this provision of care has to come from for the self-determination of of the persons, and this is something that has been violated throughout time. A person in a wheelchair, should I address it? If not, or who should do that? And there's another whole question that we should need to address, which which is which affects what I'm saying, that has to do with mental health. Many times we talk about disabilities and we talk about physical disabilities, and but what the difficulties are originated because of mental health. There are other elements that we need to take into account, and I'm not talking about persons with disabilities, but I'm also talking about Alzheimer's and dementia, where other elements appear that the persons who the caregivers have to have different tools to accompany those processes, and as to what extent self-determination and autonomy can be carried out, and how can these people achieve that. I remember that the first call the care portal near was received, it was a caregiver that wanted to train, that went to training so as to provide care, was the first one to receive this call, and that became evident. So, and I agree completely with what Laura said, that that until the state is not present, it would be very difficult to handle other questions, other issues like the right not to care. I'm a defender of this. There are other things that we need to achieve before we get to that one. Then a last comment regarding self-care. I think that there are some standards in the region, some regulatory frameworks in the region. And I always studying a law in Italy that talk about the right to time, the right to free time, and then there's an element of self-care. If we don't find that time, it's very difficult to materialize this right. To convince the ministries of economy, we need free time to work, and we need free time for other things, not to work. It's so that when we work with the government, it's at the government level, we need to incorporate the term the term of free time as well.
Muchas gracias, Patricia. Quizá antes de
Thank you,
pasar a la pregunta
Patricia.
secretaria,
Before
quisiera
giving you the
preguntarle
floor,
a Facundo,
Secretary
no sé si está
Mora,
seguro del
I'd
tema
like
de las personas con
for us to
discapacidad
listen
o
to
aquellos que les
Facundo
beneficia.
Chavez,
Y también Alba nos está
and
compartiendo
also
ventajas
Alba
también en
is
las barreras
sharing,
que habría que
is
considerar
talking
para
about the
eliminar o
barriers that need to
garantizar
be
el derecho
considered
a
to
estas personas. Adelante,
dealt
Facundo.
with
Gracias,
to have a
Excellencia.
full
Gracias,
right
Patricia.
to care. Thank
Referente
you,
a las personas
colleagues.
con discapacidad, la
With
dimensión
regard
social número
to
dos,
persons with disabilities and their need
importantísimo
for
sobre
care, I think this
oportunidad,
is,
¿no?
we
De
have a
generaciones
huge opportunity not
para
only
traer estas dimensiones
to
que Laura
bring
hablaba
these
en términos
dimensions that Laura
en términos de
mentioned
derechos,
in terms of
sino también
rights,
para traer una
but
perspectiva de
also
trabajo a nivel de
to
políticas
have a
públicas
perspective of
que
work at the
integren
level of public policies that
multidimensionalidad y
incorporates
multidependencia más fácil, ¿no?
multidimensionality,
Me
a
parece muy
broader
satisfactorio lo que decía
multidimensionality.
Patricia,
I
¿no?
I think what
Con
Patricia
respecto
was saying
a
was
cuál
very
es el lugar
interesting
que se le da
with regard to
a
what
todas las personas con
place
discapacidad, no
is
solamente
given to
a
every
personas con
person with
discapacidad física,
disabilities, not only
como
physical
sencillamente, ¿no?
disabilities, for instance, the
Responsabilidad
blind,
en,
which
en el
disability that is more evident in the social imaginary, but also how this is incorporated into systemic work for the implementation of public policies. Let, the Human Rights Council gave us a mandate to work on this issue and define what care is based on the Convention on Persons with Disabilities. And we're going to work on a conceptual, based on the conceptual work developed by a feminist movement. So I wanted to make a very an observation briefly regarding to what Patricia said, to be able to think of care systems that include response mechanisms that are integrated into the perspective of the convention, and that also allow advancing along some strategic lines in a care agenda 1.0, so to speak. We have been working on the conceptual framework on a proposal that Laura prepared in 2007. We've been working on the 3 dimensions of care and the 3 demands for public policy that include time to provide care, the value we give to care, and the way care is considered at the community level to be able to make progress along this line. So we are working in terms of the redistribution, recognition, and, and reduction of care, not only and with regard to persons with disabilities. We have been considered persons of all ages, and also with regard to self-care. You know, it's important to take this into consideration, not only for children, but also for adults and for adults with disabilities. So the work we've been doing lately will be published at the end of the year. And we've tried to include all these dimensions and include all these key elements to advance in policy making. What we did was to have 6 dimensions that are linked to social protection, trying to have systems, the kind of systems you've been developing, and another perspective that has to do with historical demands from the disability movement that aim at human supports, that which is a great category, paid and unpaid support, also support technologies, because from the perspective of public policy, support technologies reduce the burden of human support significantly. I always give the example of one thing is to have a person pushing a wheelchair, and quite another is to have an electronic wheelchair. So technologies can have systems that are more efficient. And another proposal that emerged in Argentina this year, we should include that one too, and 2 dimensions, as Patricia was saying, to incorporate the perspective of mental health and the persons that have psychosocial that are psychosocially challenged, and completing this lens and returning to the issue of autonomy, the two fundamental pillars of the convention are legal capacity that that has to do with autonomy mainly, although there are other dimensions included, and within the framework of the convention we have it has to do with Article 14 of the convention that has to do with arbitrary detentions in systems and, and, and that have to do with household structures and other structures that hinder the exercise of an autonomous life. So it seems to me that what, according to the conceptual framework of the feminist movement regarding care, I think this is an excellent opportunity to discuss how we can redistribute these supports and all these tools that the disability movement has contributed to the debate and the provision of care. I think that these dimensions, when the secretary talked about the model law, I think these dimensions tend to be absent. I don't know why they tend to be absent in the debate, from the debate. And they tend to be absent when the systems are integrated. So all the work that has been done in matters of disability, social protection, supports, autonomous life, community protection can be can provide valuable contributions to this debate and also anchor much better, as Laura was saying, anchor uh, and remember that we also have the human rights approach that can, that is already there, and we have the human rights approach for elderly adults. So, the human rights approach broadens all these dimensions when we're dealing with the formulation of public policy. So there are many instruments that we can use, and I believe it would be great that as from today, we could incorporate all these tools into this systemic conceptual framework to avoid having gaps in the framework. Thank you, and sorry for
Muchas
having
gracias,
spoken
Facundo.
so
Me
much.
parece que aquí
Thank you, Facundo.
ASACO nos está
And
haciendo algunas
Asako, I
referencias
wanted
de
to
lo
say that
del caso de
Asako
mujeres adultas
is
mayores que
sharing
sufren
with
violación de
us
sus derechos humanos
a
y
reference
abona pues a
to
los
a
mensajes que compartió
report,
Facundo.
the human
No sé
rights
si
of
gustan
older
hacer
women, the
algún
intersection between
complemento.
aging and gender.
Bueno, yo diría que dado como la
Secretary,
experiencia
please,
del
you have the
transporte
floor. Okay,
intersectorial, yo
with
quiero
regard
enfatizar
to the experience
algo
of
que
the
viene de la entidad y
intersectoral,
es el tema de la interseccionalidad y cómo
the
empezar a
issue of the
abordar las
intersectionality
diferencias
is very
requiere
important,
bajar un
and
poco más
see
el tipo de
how
reflexión que se
we
tiene
need to
y me parece
ground
que eso
the
es
reflection
fundamental.
a bit better.
Evidentemente,
And I believe
nosotros
this is
cuando
essential.
hicimos la reunión de expertas,
I remember
en
when
cada una
we
de ellas
had the
señalando
meeting of
los
experts, we
distintos
saw
matices, ¿verdad?
how
Eh,
everyone was
la,
discussing the
la
different
lógica
nuances
de
of
cómo
care and the logic.
encontrarnos en dependencia y migrar a autonomía tiene que estar presente siempre en la
The
discusión
importance of not only
o sea, tiene que estar
focusing on
incorporada
dependency, but migrating
en el
to autonomy
procedimiento, en la ley.
has to be reflected in the law.
Y la ruta también era haber
And the
involucrado
pathway
el concepto de
was to
interdependencia
have
también
placed the
entendiendo esa
concept of
relación entre todas las personas
interdependency
que nos parecía
to
que en la ruta
understand
conceptual
how
también
we all
clave
interact
y
with
que
each
también
other.
hace
We
la
thought it
película,
was
pues esas
important, but
reflexiones
it
que
still needs fine tuning.
han
So that's why these
aparecido en este
collective
sentido.
reflections are
Eh,
so strategic.
la, la lógica
The logic
lo que señalaban del derecho a no
of what you
curar
were mentioning
y,
regarding the
y
right
de cómo
not
este
to
podría ser un
care
argumento para las
and
mujeres
how this could
eventualmente,
be an
pero no
argument
siempre tenemos que
that
hacer las
men
mismas reglas
could
para las
misuse.
mujeres cuando nuestra
Absolutely, I
propia
absolutely
historia
agree.
milenaria
But
y de
you know, this could also
colonización tiene
happen for
alguna clase de
women
compensación
because
histórica.
we
Entonces,
women
no es
need
este
a kind of
simplemente castigo de las
historical
mujeres, sino
reward or
deshumanizarlas por
compensation.
responsabilidad. ¿Qué pasaría
And
en
you
ese
know,
sentido? Pues
maybe the
esto,
focus should be
casi
on
no era exactamente un debate,
co-responsibility.
sino una discusión
This was not a legal
reivindicatoria.
debate,
En
but
ese sentido,
um,
mueve
a
mucho y se moviliza
vindicative
mucho
or vindication
en esto, es decir,
discussion to see
cómo decir que este
how
énfasis de la
to
historia que hemos cuidado
explain that
milenariamente
historically
enseñará
we've been
cómo recuperamos la
caregivers
corresponsabilidad y qué significa
in
para
solitude.
luego, sin
How can
el hecho de
we,
que las mujeres queramos optar por trabajos remunerados
if
externos. O sea,
you know, to
ese,
give us the
solo para terminar esa
possibility
reflexión,
to opt
bueno, ahí
for
no
working
podemos hablar de
outside the
temas
household?
necesariamente como el derecho a
I
no curar,
think
pero sí
maybe
es
we
decir,
can't
no
word
es
it, we shouldn't word it as the right
cuando
to
estamos
not to
diciendo
care,
que
but
hay que ver las
implicitly
corresponsabilidades
there
para que
has
sea
to
cuando
be
vamos al inicio de la reflexión
co-responsibility.
en lo como lo veníamos haciendo.
And
Entonces, bueno,
we're not going to
eso es
continue
básicamente
providing care
digamos que lo
the
que
way
queríamos
we've been
tocar en este
historically
momento.
providing
El
it.
tema
Now,
de que todo está basado
about
en trabajo,
the
en
fact
trabajo,
that
sí
everything
fue una discusión enorme
is about the fact that care is regarded as care
entre
work,
Stoker
as
y
work.
reflexiones
It
sobre
was
esto,
a big
tenía que
discussion,
ver con
but
una
it had to
reivindicación
do
histórica de la división
with
sexual
the
del trabajo
historical
y
vindication
otra
of
es
the
resignificar trabajo
sexual division
digamos
of
desde la
work.
posibilita o
So
para
regarding care as
resolver
work
este
was a
conflicto,
pathway to
de
resolve this
llevarlo a otros
conflict
espacios
and to bring it to
y
other
colocarlo entre lo no remunerado
spaces.
y lo remunerado,
And,
pero que también le
and we
coloca
were
una
able to
pregunta
discuss paid and
de los que
unpaid
derivan unos
work.
derechos que son
And
difíciles de
so,
emanar si no lo conceptualizamos
but
así. Y
and
por
if
eso
we
fue
don't
que presentamos,
conceptualize care as
digamos,
work, there are other rights that
en
are
esta
very
reflexión.
difficult
Eh,
to pinpoint.
me
So
parece
that's why we used
que,
work, care as
que
work.
la
Uh,
posibilidad
I believe that the
de una
possibility
ley de
of
profundizarse en
having
las
of
discusiones
a law
es muy difícil, por
going
eso busqué la
deeper
palabra adecuada que llene
in
todas
discussions
estos
is
vacíos
very
que después se me
difficult
ocurrió
because
mucho
it's very difficult
la
to
guía
close
y
all the
es
existing
parte,
gaps.
bueno, no quiero ir
That's
mucho
why
hacia
we
eso, pero la duda
resorted to the
cómo
implementation
será que
guide.
la lógica de la
And
dependencia no le
I
resta
don't know
valor a la
how
autonomía, que es lo
we
que siempre hemos
can
colocado.
focus on dependency
Y
without
bueno, estas
valuing
discusiones
autonomy. I
en mi
still
país lo habíamos
have
dado como,
problems
digamos, como
there.
la discusión de cuarentena,
So,
por ejemplo. Lo que también trato de
so
señalar
what
aquí es que
I've
todas las
tried
discusiones no pueden ir en el mismo
to
instrumento. Es
underscore is
decir,
that
tienen que estar
one
claras
single
dentro del contexto,
instrument
pero no
cannot
pueden entrar en
reflect
el mismo
each
instrumento
and every
desarrollado
debate
en muchos otros y por
because
eso rescato la reflexión que nos hacías
because
Patricia
it's
y la dimensión
impossible
curatela,
and
porque
that's
yo
why
estaba
I
totalmente de
also
acuerdo con
emphasize curatela, what
las
happened in
personas
curatela
en
and the
ciertas
autonomy
circunstancias
of people.
y bueno, y cómo
And I
buscar
believe,
constructos concretos que
I think
alimenten esta discusión
how we
que
can
puede ser que esté
rescue and
absolutamente
retrieve
pausados y me
some
parece que ese es el
specific
punto de inflexión
outcomes or
como
products
mujeres
that can be
representativas y
included
científicos
in,
como lo que
at
nosotros
least in
queremos
an
hacerlo. Entonces,
instrument like the
bueno,
one we have
no sé, Beatriz, si
developed.
tienes algún
I don't know,
comentario
Beatrice, if you
adicional
have
en esto,
additional
sobre nuestra
comments
reflexión
to give in
general
this regard
y bueno, la importancia de estas
and the
reflexiones y estas
importance of
discusiones me
these
parecen absolutamente estratégicas
reflections
y para
is,
encontrar amigas
in my
sólidas
opinion,
en estas
completely
carreras
strategic and
externas que
historical
avanzamos
because
cada vez que otro
we
avance
can
vamos
move forward
profundizando así en la vida que vamos generando
and such is life, you know, because we move forward and then we move backward. And
digamos
with
las
regard to
investigaciones que
care,
hemos hecho y
we
la
have had
propuesta que
so
hemos generado
many
es realmente
instances of
impresionante. Creo que si lo
resignifying the
teníamos claro desde el
concept.
inicio,
It's
creo que también
incredible. We
lo
were
podemos
clear
seguir
as to how
manteniendo
difficult this was going to
y
be
cada
from
vez
the
que vamos
beginning.
colocando un tema
But
en
every
discusión
time
surgen entonces
we discuss
preguntas que
an
se nos
issue,
colocan
there are
y lo
thousands and
hacen
thousands of
resultar cada
questions
vez con
that
mayores potencialidades.
flip it over and make us look at it from different perspectives. Thank you.
Pues muchas gracias, secretaria. Y muchas
Thank
gracias,
you,
Patricia. Pues sí,
Secretary.
gracias
Thank
por
you,
el tiempo,
Patricia,
por la
Cossani,
información que nos
for
dimos.
your
Y
time,
yo
for
creo que
having
la
prepared
comunidad
this,
tampoco pretende
these
este,
inputs. And of course,
sí
our
intentamos a veces ocultar
community.
algunas respuestas,
Yes,
pero
we
estas
don't
respuestas son
provide answers, of
específicas,
course
¿no?
not.
Pero creo que es
We,
muy
of course,
importante
we have
plantearlas.
been focusing on asking
Recojo esto que
questions, but
compartió Facundo, ¿no?
so
Acerca
as Facundo was
de
saying,
siempre esta oportunidad de
he
que estamos
envisions
creciendo
an
territorial,
opportunity
dialogue y
to
habría
see
veces
the
irnos por
possibility of
ejemplos de
dialogue
discapacitación,
between
pero al mismo tiempo
the
sí se
world of
requieren
care and the
competencias
world of
para algunos
disability.
adultos mayores
And the same holds true for
vulnerables
the
y
world of
accesibles.
aging adults. And
Podemos hacer
as
de llamarles
Sako says,
poblaciones
perhaps we
prioritarias
can
estos
stop
grupos específicos
talking about them as
sostener la continuidad de
priority
un derecho que
populations, but
estamos
as
queriendo
specific
promover y avanzar
groups that are
y sí
rights
coincido
holders.
secretaria que
So I
afortunadamente
agree
se está
with
dando esa
you
oportunidad y creo que la
that,
región está dando
Secretary, that
avances
CARE is
importantes.
giving us the
Bueno, pues gracias
opportunity to make
nos estaremos
significant
viendo
progress.
en
So
la
without
siguiente sesión que como
further
se
ado,
anunciaba
we will
vamos a
wrap
tener
up
ahora
and
la
we'll meet
presidencia
in
de
the
Europa
next session.
como
We
a
will
nivel regional
discuss the
se
case of
encuentra.
Europe and see
Nos vemos entonces
what the
martes
status is at the
9
regional
de octubre
level. We'll
presencial la
meet,
información,
we'll
le
reconvene
enviaremos
on
esta
October
sesión
4th.
y
We will send
les
you the
respondremos
summary note
de
for
esta
this
siguiente
session
sesión. Pues muchas
and the
gracias a
agenda
todas, a todos,
for
que
October the
tengan
4th.
un buen mes
Thank
y
you very
sábado
much.
con Dios
Have a
por delante.
great month.